Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November edition of ESG's Customer Success Unlocked webinar series. Appreciate your time and attendance. My name is Michael Harnum. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at ESG, the Customer Success as a Service company. I wanted to let you know a couple things before we get started today. First is that we are recording this session, and each of you will get a link to the recording that will go out within 24 hours. So keep it clean, my friends. Secondly, there is a Q&A tab that you have at the bottom of your screen. And so as the session is going, if you have questions, feel free to deposit them there. We'll do our best to get to them in the context of the session or perhaps at the end of the session, depending on the flow of the conversation, but we'll do our best to get to as many as we possibly can. I wanted to introduce and welcome Angela Hahn to today's webinar as our guest. Angela is Chief Customer Officer at Pluralsight. Angela is a customer success practitioner. She has built and stood up customer success at different size companies over the last several years. She's got a delivery background, an operations background, a sales background, a customer success background, and an awesome background. So we're really pleased to have Angela on today. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. And I literally have a blurry background on today. So maybe what you just described has captured that.
All right, so before we get started on the topic, which today is entitled Building a Renewals Practice Inside of Customer Success, I have a couple off-script questions for Angela, and we'll see how this goes. Are you ready?
As ready as I will be.
All right, your favorite concert you ever attended, when and why? And I'll answer these two, just to be fair.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay, my favorite concert was maybe not technically a concert, but it involved a real band, which was I ended up seeing in a bar in New York City, maybe 20 years ago, Prince. He didn't show up till like 5 a.m, but that was pretty remarkable, a little unexpected, and you know, coming from a person who's about 5'1" on a good day, you know, he was kind of like my height-ish, you know, so it was impressive to see him on stage. So yeah, that was a pretty fun concert.
Yeah, that's awesome. That does sound fun. The timing, the location, the artist, all of it. So mine would be, I think I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, back in the 30s. And my buddy and I bought a ticket and a van ride to a concert that was an hour away to see Judas Priest with the warm-up band was Iron Maiden. And for any of you that follow heavy metal, you will understand, you know, the impact of that twin bill and what an epic day it was for young metalheads like us. And, you know, now I'm a gray-haired metalhead and still enjoy Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, but it was an awesome experience for the both of us. All right, you've advanced to level 2. Level 2 is what's the most radical thing you've done recently? Meaning something out of your comfort zone, something you're learning, something that you're pushing yourself towards, you know, in your more recent past.
Ooh. I would say it was when I decided to get certified to teach Vinyasa yoga.
Wow.
It's just been a long time since I was always playing sports when I was growing up. So accustomed to having workouts, early hours, commitment, and so on. But as an adult, after kids, I just didn't have that rhythm. And, you know, you got to get in 600 hours of yoga practice.
Right.
So that was good kind of new rhythm to bring back into my life for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love it when people, you know, put the investment in of time into something that's important to them in a meaningful way. So mine would be at the start of the summer. I signed up for a 7-mile swim race, and I'm not a very good swimmer, and I hadn't swam in 10 years. So you could question the wisdom of doing something like that, but I love finding boundaries and seeing if that is the real boundary or is the boundary actually out there somewhere else. And I think there's some career applications too, to the limitations that we put on ourselves personally and the power of our mind in limiting our ability to succeed. And so I started training in, I don't know, March or April, and the race was in end of August, and I did it. It took me more than 4 hours to do it, but it was fun. And what I learned was, if you're pushed out to sea somewhere between 7 and 10 miles and had to swim to shore if your life depended on it, I could do it. So there we go.
Impressive.
Or crazy, depending on who you talk to. All right, let's dig into renewals. You ready?
Yes.
All right. And so when you think of the topic of renewals, it becomes front and center for a couple reasons in our current context. The driving force, of course, is the subscription economy, where everyone's subscribing to everything. And if you're not effective in keeping the revenue that you worked so hard to get, your business is going to get sideways or upside down in a hurry. If you look at some recent data, we recently did a customer success survey in conjunction with Higher Logic and Churn Zero. And I also read a TSIA State of Customer Success report. They came to the same conclusion around renewals, and that is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50% of companies have renewals residing in the customer success organization, right? So the other half reside somewhere else. And so that tells me that it is a very active topic, the destination of a renewals practice. Does it belong in CS or does it not? And the answer may be different by company, but in your experience, Angela, like how do you evaluate, how do you begin thinking about the proper destination for renewals in those different environments?
Yeah, I think if I look back to the last 5 or 6 companies I've worked at, it has been handled in a variety of ways. There's not been a single, only one way model for me. And I always start with the customer and the customer experience. So what are their needs? And I think that depends on your company, the technology. Is it a plug and play, or is it actually quite a solution oriented offering? And I just kind of work backwards. What do our customers need at that event? And then we need to map our teams who have that skill set and have that knowledge to address those needs. And so for certain companies I've worked at, it has resided in sales because it was a very land and expand kind of play. And so at that time of renewal, there was always a conversation of kind of the next layer or the next service to add on. Whereas today, where I am at Pluralsight, our customers, we assist them in pretty significant transformations, workforce transformations. And so this is a conversation. This is a solution. You use our technology, but we're also guiding some best practice. So that familiarity with their journey and their needs, it really makes a lot of sense for customer success to continue that conversation. So I just think you need to really look at your customers, your technology, and then let's map it to meet their needs.
Right. Makes sense. And then when you think about the performance of a renewals practice in those different environments, whether it's land and expand, whether it's something else, depending on the needs of the customer, as you articulated, are there different metrics that you look at to call out different dimensions of a renewals practice in those different organizations and their approach?
Well, I think about the key metrics that I have for my team, which are going to be no surprise: gross retention, net retention, really critical, and making sure that those core KPIs are aligned and complementary to sales comp. And so those are critical, but what's really varied across the different companies I've worked at is what are kind of the OKRs, right? Which are specifically designed to make sure that if our customer success managers can focus on this upstream of the renewal, then we've got more likelihood of success at the time of renewal, no matter who manages that renewal event. And so those OKRs can really vary. We have been recently collecting verifiable outcomes from our customers. And that's been a learning journey. That's been something that I don't think is really well defined yet in customer success, but really asking the direct, clear question to our customers of what value do you get from our technology or X name of product here. And, you know, any answer is incredibly informative, right? It is that they experience a value and here's the quantifiable results that they bring to their management to really show the impact to, we don't see the value. And that is actually incredibly powerful, right? Because now you know, wow, we have some work to do with this customer and really making sure we understand like, well, what did they hope to get out of it? And how do we map to understanding, because all of those stakeholders that we work with value different things. And sometimes we decided that, right? So I think different OKRs should be mapping to kind of your business, your technology. And so verifiable outcomes, you know, even this is going to be kind of provocative, but there are times where I am looking at the EBRs, executive business reviews, and we define what that expectation is. You need to have an executive at that session, but also the frequency, the timing of when you have those EBRs prior to the renewal. Like when you define it to make sure that you have visibility into how they see your solution, what impact it's been having or not having, and you have the timing right so that you still have impact, you have time to impact their decisions. That can actually be a pretty powerful metric as well. So I think it really just depends on your company, but those are just some of the ones that are ones that I have found actually kind of move the needle in terms of our conversations with our CSMs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit more about this concept of a verifiable outcome and in what context you're getting to those answers? I know several CS leaders have begun like a VOC, voice of the customer type program. Some are running either inside or outside of customer success, a customer experience or a CX practice. And so what's the context of how you are having those verifiable outcome conversations with your customers at Pluralsight?
So within our customer journey, one of the first steps in the client engagement model, we actually co-create a success plan with our customer, right? And again, just always remembering that you're dealing with multiple stakeholders. So you need to be kind of tracking against each of the key stakeholders, like what they care about and how they're impacted by the success of this program. And so when we co-create, you start to get a real sense of what their expectations are, what their needs are. And so the verifiable outcome is, consider it just keeping a pulse on how are we pacing to that? So it starts there. You have to know it up front, because otherwise I would be anxious as a CSM because I wouldn't know what I'm really kind of going for. So align up, and then those verifiable outcomes is just a direct question, but it becomes a lot more comfortable to ask those direct questions when you've had those conversations up front, and it's sometimes it can feel maybe scary to ask, are you experiencing value, and what's getting in the way? Sometimes it can be a little nerve-wracking of like, what if they say they're not experiencing value? And then you just need to remind your team, well, let's know now before they're up for renewal. And let's make sure they get the most value out of our solution. That is our job. That is our job.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the glaring gaps in a lot of customer success practices that we see is that embracing the concept of value realization. Like, do you know what value is expected? Are you asking the hard questions? Are you willing to do something about the answers you get that you may not like? And too often it's that step is skipped. We're going to do a good job with onboarding. We're going to help, with adoption. We might look at some consumption data, and then we're going to ask you, for a renewal at the appropriate time. And there's a big gap in between there in terms of value realization that you've articulated that can not only have a strong impact on the renewal, but also could create, advocates for you in the marketplace in a really powerful way. So it's an important point.
Yeah, and I also just want to add, it's important to always highlight your differentiation throughout the whole journey. You don't wait for just the end when it's time for renewal. And hopefully we've all remembered that there are amazing marketing teams. So you better bet that your customer and those key stakeholders, and frankly, non-key stakeholders, are getting calls from your competition, right? So we always have to remind and educate what makes us different.
Yep, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about managing up in an organization, in the different climates that you've been in, and with customer success, with renewals specifically. I've seen a lot of emphasis, the higher up the organization you go, on lagging indicators, or really the ultimate lagging indicator, which is revenue growth or deterioration. And you've mentioned a couple of times now, Angela, like focusing further upstream in terms of what is working, what you're building that will have an influence on those lagging indicator outcomes. How do you package that and communicate that up into an organization so that there's a broader view of your practice, specifically around renewals, that it goes beyond, well, $1 turned into either 80 cents or $1.20, and so you either failed or succeeded? How do you broaden that conversation?
Yeah, I think there can be a strong perception by executives and frankly, any key cross-functional stakeholders that aren't directly involved in renewals, that there's this perception that it's all happening at the time of renewal. And so you do need to constantly educate the work that happens upstream of the renewal and the impact of that. And so when I first joined companies, there's, you have to provide your renewals forecast, what's your GRR forecast, and depending on the role and company, your NRR forecast. Typically, you're providing visibility into your top deals. If you've got if you kind of have larger customers who can have a deeper impact to your overall performance. And I think you have to be very deliberate in the update, that it's really kind of calling out the successes and the wins upstream, or the risks upstream, because that actually has a deep impact into how you have to try to resolve any gaps or challenges in the renewal. So, I will say there's always a story opportunity. And so when you talk about your top deals, if that's something you share with your executives, I know I do that on a regular basis. And it's no different than sales providing their forecast updates, right? So being very deliberate in those stories, and also educating how you are closing that risk gap, because then it just starts to teach them that it's not this very at the end of that renewal event. It's actually the work upstream, so that that renewal becomes a transaction, not a massive renegotiation or a resell.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think being in that sense, I've had some success in, if you're engaging frequently with customers and you're understanding at different points in the journey what is working and what is not, your level of engagement with your team, and even your personal level of engagement with some of the larger, more complicated customers, is tremendously advantageous in terms of managing that message up and laying it out the way that you said, but making sure that you're providing it in the context of a customer story and what is happening and what we're doing about it, has been a pretty effective strategy in terms of what I've seen in managing up.
Yeah, I also think it's really critical to showcase the wins that are happening upstream,
Yep.
so that if we've brought on a large customer, we need to make vocal that as a CS leader, provide proactive updates. I mean, that to me is the definition of our ability to be successful. We have to be proactive. We have to be proactive with our customers, and consistently, we need to be proactive internally. So if they start to do if we had closed a large deal that had X number of licenses, if that happens to be your model, and that they are now actively using at a really high rate, like make that visible. And I say that not only because it helps reinforce like, okay, they're on the path to success, because if they use our product, they're going to be set up to get the value of our product. So usage, and then we in customer success then translate that usage into impact, right? And then that drives the ongoing engagement with your technology, right? So it's like, you need to highlight that. But I also think it's powerful. I've worked in companies where it wasn't just customer success. Marketing may have helped us with that engagement campaign and created some slick event for it. And sales provided their role. And it's just, now you're highlighting the success of multiple teams that are contributing. And that adds to the momentum as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, customer success obviously is a cross-functional organization that impacts the lives of really everyone in the ecosystem. So that approach makes sense. The other way we've tried to do that in the marketplace, Angela, is to highlight capabilities. And this is a little more prominent for less mature customer success organizations. But oftentimes you get a sense in a maybe a smaller company that is relatively new to customer success, that an executive team says, okay, now we have a customer success thing, and therefore retention should go up, and land and expand should grow, and it should be instant because we hired all these people. And sometimes we get pulled into environments like that. And so what we like to highlight is what are your capabilities today to proactively outreach to your customers in an informed way? What do you know, and when do you do that? And if the answers are kind of light, which they often are for a new CS practice, then we focus on, okay, over the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever time period, what capabilities do we need to build into your CS practice to change that answer, so that you now are capable of communicating with your install base in a proactive and informed way? And that's one of the leading indicators, yes, that we would use, because oftentimes we're trying to help customer success leaders like justify the expense of customer success when the answer isn't yet a dollar figure. And so we just encourage any of you that are in that scenario to think about your capabilities as well, and how you can build those out, because that can tell a story of future success that we're building towards.
Absolutely. I feel like companies all kind of go through their different stages. I know I've worked where executive leadership thought renewals just happen. You don't have to burn many calories at that end. And it's, I think we'd all agree, especially in how competitive our worlds are, they don't just happen. And so that executive support, that executive awareness and support to then, create that thread through the entire organization around the value of the competencies is really powerful. Yep.
Yeah, we're playing the long game here for sure. Tell us a little bit about the pilot that you recently ran for renewals inside of customer success. Like, what was the context of that? What were you expecting to find? How many customers? How long? Like, what were you set up to discover in the pilot? And then what did you wind up finding?
Yes. So for context, the way that our renewals are managed today is that our sales account executives manage the renewal. And in most of our customer segments, they're also managing growth. In a few segments, they might just be focused on the renew and the growth, the expansion of a given customer. And then the customer success manager was really to drive the health of the account. And so that they would also be helping assist with adoption, value realization, but really just that focus on health and retention. So when it came to this pilot, we basically wanted to introduce space for customer success to continue all of their work. As I was describing, we actually, yes, we provide this great technology platform, but we also provide context of what are other companies doing when it comes to tech workforce transformation in our space. What are some of the key technical domains, skill domains that are the next topic that we should be enabling our workforce with? So there's an element of best practice and consultation that gets infused. So it does seem natural to be able to just continue that conversation and make sure that at the time of renewal, we've got the licenses and the functionality and the data to continue our programs that our customers are executing.
Yep.
And this was also intended to free up our salespeople to actually then just focus on growth opportunities. So we took about 10% of our install base, and we targeted a few territories in North America and EMEA, and we actually clarified their roles, that the customer success manager is going to own the renewal, and our AEs would only be focused on growth, and their compensation would only focus on growth. We actually do have, we support actually multiple customer segments. So our pilot also had accounts in those territories that did not have a customer success manager because they were smaller accounts, and we have a more digital driven customer experience with them. And we actually built out a very small renewals management team, and all they did was a renewal event. So the digital engagement is happening ongoing, helping guide them to onboarding. And if they're not having certain usage or they're seeing great usage, they will be receiving just relevant engagement so that they can be most successful on our platform. And then a renewals manager would come in. So this pilot ran, and we saw a little bit of everything. From the customer success side, we actually had anybody who was interested in participating in this pilot to apply, because this is a different skill set to start to negotiate agreements and embed uplift or multi-year components, right? I mean, that was not part of the job description for when they were first hired by our company. And so we had some folks apply. Some of them have never done renewals before, never done sales or anything of the sort. And then some had, and they were like, bring it on. I want to be able to control my destiny. If I'm comped on renewals, I want to be able to touch them and talk to them. And then on the sales side, it was part of their charter, right? To grow and to renew. And so they didn't have to interview. And we actually saw attrition on that side, where they were, this was a pilot, they were brought into the pilot, and some of them didn't want that pilot. And so we saw some transition there. But overall, we monitored every quarter, and we looked at the performance of gross retention and net retention and pipe gen as kind of like our success metrics. This was not just a pilot on, hey, are we going to have higher renewals? This was a pilot on, hey, the intention is not only to drive and keep our customers, but to allow our talented sales team to actually spend more of their time on growing the business and getting to more customers.
You're trying to validate a new model.
That's right.
Yeah.
So to me, that's how we win. That to me was the true measure of success. And, you know, transparently, we had very consistent higher gross retention in the pilot teams versus the non-pilot teams. The pipe gen varied, because when we saw some attrition in a team on the sales team, that slowed down their pipe, right? And then, you know, when they were hired up, then it cranked up again. But overall, their net retention was higher as well. So there was one customer segment, which is my enterprise segment, that didn't consistently perform higher. And that's just, you know, which I think most people can appreciate on this call. You know, when you have an enterprise segment, it's lumpy. So if you lose one deal or two big downsells, it hits your GRR performance pretty quickly. So we could see it and we could understand why, what was driving it. But that's how we ran the pilot. We isolated these teams. You had to apply over here. You didn't apply. We ran it and we measured pilot against pilot, non-pilot, and we really did see stronger performance in gross retention and net retention.
Great. A couple follow-up questions on that. So it sounds like, and I think this is a sign of a maturing industry as well, where you start with people who are called CSMs and they're generalists and they kind of do everything customer related and just kind of take on anything that other people don't want or aren't equipped to handle. So, but then it grows from that to, okay, you're managing this portion of the life cycle and someone else is on this end and someone else is on that end. And then you kind of mature into what you're talking about, which is really a specialization of skills against the customer need and the desired outcome. So tell me a little bit more about how you think about the specialization of skills. You mentioned in the pilot, that you were interviewing and looking for skills that were in the sales renewal space for that specific motion. Are there other areas in your customer success practice where you apply a similar methodology of skill identification against the client need?
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, I think there's a balance. It's a really tough balancing act. And so at Pluralsight, we've been around for 2 decades. I've been with the company for 2 years. This company, we cater to every customer segment you can imagine. We have customers that have an average of 9 licenses to our platform. And then we have customers that have 70,000 licenses. And so we cater to different customer segments. And that's probably, Harnum, where we actually really map our skills. Because as you can imagine, our larger customers and those larger deployments have, they have bigger rollouts. They have more data to work with. There's more logistics in running their programs and managing their licenses and their users. And they're trying to move the needle, right? So I will be hiring people who probably are from that industry, are really good at managing all of those multiple stakeholders because they're really threaded throughout the organization. And so when it comes to the renewal, it is making sure that we've got their needs covered from the health and adoption and value realization perspective. And then we actually had decided when it comes to managing renewals that I'm actually inserting a strategic renewals manager. And so I made that skills choice. I introduced a new team member to that account team because I looked at all the skills I needed to drive their customer health and through the journey, and to find that with commercial experience and the bandwidth to navigate those procurement cycles, which can be quite complex in a large enterprise. Those are unicorns that are really hard to find. And I would argue, if I could even find them, are they really set up for success? Like it's a very there's a lot of time needed for all of those parts. So I built the model to cater to that. And then I have different customer segments. So if there's folks on this call who are earlier stage, or maybe your customers, you have less specialization and your CSMs actually have a larger portfolio. Actually that's where I have my CSM managing the renewal, because they are so close to all of the programs that they're running that it has been a natural conversation. And it's less about total negotiation, and it's more about let's continue this work. And you actually have another population over there, so we can add on some more licenses and let's keep the work. We really are partners, and it's just an extension of their team.
Yeah, that makes sense. What can you tell us about how you balance the relationship between investment cost in the business for additional roles versus outcomes? probably ask more simply, like, how do you manage your budget from a skills resource allocation against the expected outcome, right? Because I think a lot of people are in a scenario where I've got a fixed budget, and so the answer has to be the budget. I've got some flexibility in terms of how I allocate that budget against my desired outcomes and against the skill sets that I need. But what I can't do is just add resources and begin to stack things on top of each other, and then I'm over my budget. You can get there really, really quickly. So how do you think about balancing investment against results from a budgetary standpoint?
Yes, there's never enough CS, right? So you do really need to use your dollars wisely. So for folks on this call, I don't know if you're working at a company of 20 or 20,000. My company is about, my team is about 200 or 300, about 250, approaching 300 customer success managers. And while that sounds maybe indulgent, there are thousands of customers that I can't give a customer success manager to. So it is really hard. But here's something I really want to encourage companies to consider, which is the emerging part of customer success, or at least in my experience. There's less best practice and less, more and more companies are facing it, but there's the high touch customer success where you have you have your partner in crime, this human that's with you and attending multiple meetings and running business reviews with you. And then there's the more high tech customer success model, which is digital. I have definitely worked with customer marketing teams that have transformed our customer experience. We don't have to do this alone. And to do things at scale, it sometimes doesn't feel like the paradigm. I still have salespeople who say, Angela, I really want to CSM on this account. And I get it. But I also have really seen awesome transformation when we've been creating thoughtful digital campaigns with customers. But it's not only partnering with, I do it cross-functionally. I've been working with customer marketing. We don't feel like we're on separate teams. Like, we are tight. They are targeted on gross retention as well. Like, we're very collaborative. But it's also like, you got to watch that data, right? Because it's not just like set it and forget it. Like, you need to be setting these up. You're going to be running a lot of A/B testing. But as you see the results and where you start to move the needle, you just need to stay on top of it, just like you would invest in a customer success manager. This data is so critical to be monitoring and optimizing the experience that you're creating at scale there. So that, to me, is definitely can require less budget, because most of our budgets are most expensive through our people. But if you can put some investment in your customer marketing, that can pay off in unbelievable ways.
Yep. Yeah, we see the same thing all over the marketplace, and certainly agree with that perspective. One of the ways we try to anchor that concept in terms of what you look at and what you measure, one way would be if you can expand the book of business that each CSM can manage with digital support. What would it take for me to go from managing a book of business of 20 accounts to 50? If there were some elements that were pulled out of my responsibility, that's one way. And then the other way, which is a much more macro thought, is cost to serve, right? How can I serve a customer base that has thousands of customers in it as efficiently as possible, so that they're getting what they need, but the customers are getting what they need, but I'm not throwing an army of people at it that would turn my budget upside down. Do you pay attention to either of those two concepts, or there are other concepts that you look at to assess how that balance is going in your world?
Yeah, And I have typically rolled up to the broader revenue organization, right? So all of that cost, but I do pay close attention to cost to renew. And candidly, when that renewal sits with sales, that is a very expensive renewal. No matter how you slice it, no matter what company I've worked at, it's just expensive. So cost to renew is really important. And yeah, that's when you think about the investment in your gross retention, it tends to pay off in dividends, right? I mean, if you have 5 CSMs that cover 100 customers and you lift that gross retention by X points, like they more than can pay for themselves, right? And so I do think just monitor, like being very deliberate in how you set your gross retention targets. It honestly, for me, it has actually afforded me more budget than I think initially thought was reasonable, but it more than pays for itself depending on the size of your company and how much is up for renewal. I'm guessing many of us have annual renewals or multi-year renewals. And the more you push multi-year, the less cycles you have and less risk you have in your gross retention. So if you incentivize the multi-years, right, then you're really being thoughtful about how you're protecting that gross retention and as efficiently as possible.
Right. That makes sense. So let's circle back to this pilot that you ran. And so you've summarized kind of the key learnings for us. And now when you think, Angela, about moving forward and scaling the pilot, how do you think about taking something from 10% of your customers to a higher percentage based upon those learnings? What does scale in the renewal pilot that you ran look like?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I had been able to do within my customer success organization and what we also communicated across the company. And so I guess my short answer to your question is change management is really important. Yeah. So, you know, just for additional context, we are, you know, above 350 million, right? And so when you're 350 million in ARR and 10%, 35 million, like that's nothing to sneeze at. But we've got a large global revenue workforce. And so when we ran this pilot, everybody knew we were running the pilot. And every quarter we reported out the progress and the learnings and the observations and the successes. And the successes were on the sales side and the customer success side. And so that change management is really, really critical to communicate, and then communicate again. Yep. And so, yeah, you know, by the time we made the decision and announced the decision of, okay, we're going to move forward in 2022, we're successful own renewals. You know, there were probably some stalwarts who were probably like, oh, we're still not going to do it. We're not, you know, but for the most part, I probably lost maybe a handful of CSMs during the year of like, if this is where we're going, I don't really want to do that. Right. And then I probably had many dozen of salespeople saying, I'm kind of interested. I like that part. Right. Yep. So yep. It's, you know, but I do think a change at our size company, like that's a hard one to just like flip the switch on. You know, you got to really communicate this. And it's going to go both ways. You know, you need to hear executives in your company and why we want to do this and what kind of impact it's going to have to our business, to our customers. But we also ran like quarterly, it was actually every other month, we would ran a global renewals forum. And so people could join, wasn't required. And it was just, you know, customer success people are people, you know, so they're willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to help each other. And so we would have some of the folks in the pilot just be available for Q&A. And there were questions as open as, what are the skills that you think are really needed to be successful in this? Like, what were you afraid of? What was the hardest part? How does it now feel with your account executives, like your partner? Were they supportive of this? So there were a lot of just questions and dialogue to frankly destigmatize this and make it real and a safe place to start having that thinking shift.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Change management and communication planning around those changes are very, very critical, often overlooked and sometimes underestimated. And it just drags out the impact of whatever change you're trying to make over a typically unacceptable period of time. So yeah, that's a good place to emphasize. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, you've touched on your compensation models being aligned to the expectations. And so if you think about, you've got sales, you've got a, full journey CSM, you've got a renewals focused person sitting in CS. What have you learned about compensation models? What did you get right? What would you do differently? And how should the rest of us be thinking about specialized roles and the associated compensation to drive the result?
Yeah. So in our company, there was a perception prior to this pilot that our sales comp and our CS comp did not complement each other, and that sometimes there could create dissonance on what we should do with the customer based on what they needed to accomplish versus what they needed to accomplish. And so when we ran the pilot, we wanted to try to, as intentionally as we could, align them. And so what we had done was we recognized we're in it to win it as a company. And in order to do that, let's protect our customer base and keep growing, right? Mm-hmm. And so gross retention and net retention, eyes on the prize. Mm-hmm. And so customer success, 80% of their variable comp was on NRR targets, and 20% of their comp was on, 80% was on gross retention targets, and then 20% was on net retention targets. Mm-hmm. Because as much as we're in it to protect and keep our customers, we also are fostering that customer health, right? To be able to seed more growth opportunities so that it's not just keep them. It's like, let's have them for life. And so how do you nurture them to be able to continue to leverage more from Pluralsight? Yep. Now, the sales side was the opposite. They were 80% on their growth, right? So call that the net retention. So that's their targets, but 20% was on gross retention. So we literally both teams were on GRR and NRR, but in the opposite way, 80-20.
Different weighting, yep.
And it was like 20% is like enough. Like when you start doing like 5%, 7%, like that's hard for anyone to get like super like double down on. Versus like, I'm going to spend my time on the majority, but 20% was an interesting medium that kept people engaged and wanting to help the other team member out. And that was very clear feedback from the pilot team, sales and CS, of like, we were focused on the same things.
Yep.
So we will be rolling out that broadly. Well, things will be finalized, but directionally speaking, we're very committed to making sure that these are going to stay complementary.
Right. That makes sense. Thanks for that. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I did want to take a peek into the questions and see what we can do to help folks out specifically. And so if you haven't launched a question into the Q&A tab, go for it. First, from Sam Kessler. Thanks, Sam. Angela, do you use a CS tool for your co-created success plans? Is it templated, pretty customized, customer to customer? How do you think about that?
Oh, Sam, I wish we had something really clean and consistent across our, 20,000 plus customers, but I will admit we are not at that stage. We do house our success plans in Gainsight, but I do think there's more opportunity to have a little bit more templatized approach. But I also have a point of view that I think there are going to be different expectations of detail, well, not detail, but a sophistication. That with some of our larger engagements, there's just more complexity. And that, as we can all appreciate, the small milestones add up to a lot, and we need to capture that, because if we miss those milestones, we're not going to hit that, final, the finish line. So I do think there could be slightly different versions that we will need when we actually get more consistent on it.
Yep. And tell me about the fingerprints that are on those plans. Is it authored by a CSM with input from other organizations, or who's contributing to that?
Yeah, great question. The CSM is authoring it in partnership with the customer.
Okay.
And what we do is that we typically have the account executive in those working sessions. So again, it's early on after they've closed, because the salesperson is familiar with why they bought, right? So they can add and contribute to that. But I will say we've been really doing a big push with our multi-year customers, that this is an annual conversation. Right. I mean, think about all of our companies. Every year we have new goals, new targets, right? Mm-hmm. Still the same companies, still have that end finish line, but it's like every year you need to resync with your customer and stay close. And that's super helpful, because I'm guessing we all face the ongoing challenge of our stakeholders change, right? Somebody gets promoted, somebody leaves the company. So it's a really important event to really engage and get your stakeholders so that you know what they each care about.
Yep, makes sense. We didn't get this question specifically, but I know it's on a lot of people's minds. Tell us a little bit about your tech stack beyond Gainsight. Like what's important to you in your tech stack world? And then if you think about, the next 1 to 2 years, like what needs do you have to support the evolution of your customer success practice from a technology standpoint?
Yeah. So we are Gainsight users, and we obviously work within Salesforce outside of just Gainsight, so that because our sales team can view Gainsight, but there's just certain fields and such that are only housed in Salesforce. We've also recently introduced People AI to keep track of our key stakeholders and what we can be doing differently, just by helping get the visibility for our CSMs on what may have changed and help target some of those plays. Gong, I think, is a really important tool for CSMs, especially if you're going to own the renewal. We are never done coaching. We are never done learning. And there's so much that we can learn from each other. So I think that's an important tool, because it's not reasonable for most leaders to be able to attend all of their team members' calls, right? Or frankly, some other team members' calls. So that's a really important tool. So those are some of the biggies that I would say we use.
Okay. And so tell me a little bit about how do you use Gong? Like what is the interaction with that tool and a CSM and their manager look like, and how regularly are they having those conversations?
Yeah, so within our pilot, we did encourage all recordings of calls, and I'm not super close to it because I'm not recording my calls, but I do believe there's just, first of all, transcription. So there's efficiency for the CSM to go back, make sure we didn't miss anything. But management is then able to review them, listen, and provide coaching, Right. And so I think what's so powerful as management, no matter what domain we're managing, when you've got this record, it's our opportunity to help our team know what great looks like. And we need to communicate what that is, but it's one thing to say it, but then when you can hear recording, you can give all that positive feedback and reinforcement of like, that was awesome, you crushed it here. And then equally, hey, let's talk about this part. How did that go for you? Because it sounds like you kind of struggled a little bit during this discovery. Like what happened? And then it might turn into, let's just capture some good discovery questions. Like just have them, on your desk and as a stick-it so that you can, reuse them whenever you need to. But it's,
Yep.
you just have those coaching opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. Super important. Especially with, again, it ties back to a relatively immature marketplace where you're unlikely to find a CSM with years and years and years of customer success experience. They may have peripheral experience that is relevant to the role, but refining that skill set specifically for customer success through an intentional coaching program is obviously a big deal. So we're getting close to time here. I would say for the audience that we have, any final words of encouragement or guidance that you have for them, Angela, before we sign off?
I just want to remind us all in customer success that we have huge impact to the business. I just had a leadership all hands yesterday, and with the renewals moving over, or even if renewals are owned by sales or another part of your organization, for most of our companies, that is the largest bucket of business that we own, and that's your team. So I think as leaders, we need to advocate for our teams. To Harnum's point, like have the tools, the stack needed to help them be successful and efficient. But really, those renewals, it's all about driving the success prior to that renewal event, right? Being proactive, being curious, aligning to what they need, their expectations, sometimes resetting those expectations, but then having those ongoing conversations and questions of like, are you experiencing this value? Are you experiencing what we set out to do? Don't be afraid to ask those questions, know it ahead of time. And I think that's going to be really powerful.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, in conclusion, Angela, thank you for your time. I enjoyed this, had fun doing it. It's always great to see you. Appreciate your insight and wisdom collected along the way. And for the audience out there, a reminder that we will send out a link to this recording within 24 hours. We appreciate you joining our Customer Success Unlocked webinar, and we will have another session in December. So stay tuned for more details on that. My last plug while I have a moment here is we are always hiring here. We are growing significantly at ESG. So if you or anyone you know is looking for roles in customer success, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at esgsuccess.com/careers, or you can reach out to me directly and I can get you connected as appropriate. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you again, Angela. Let's make it a great day. See you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.